Good morning, and welcome to Impartial News TV. I'm Chantel Brown, bringing you the stories that matter most. Today, we focus on a tragic story that has gripped South Africa, a love affair turned fatal. A young woman was killed in an act of jealousy, and her partner took his own life soon after. This heartbreaking case highlights the fragility of relationships and the dire consequences of unchecked emotions. To explore the deeper issues of mental health, toxic relationships, and societal roles in preventing such tragedies, join our podcast Inside the Headlines. This week, experts and community leaders unpack the details and broader implications of this devastating event. Tune into Inside the Headlines for this gripping discussion. Stay informed. Stay empowered. This is Impartial News TV.
It's a week that makes you stop and think. When a murder case from South Africa is this intense, it's hard to look away when the details are just so disturbing.
Yeah.
This is the case of Sibusiso Lawrence,
Right.
accused of killing his ex-girlfriend, and then later found dead himself in what looks like a suicide.
Yeah.
And you brought some articles
It's r-
from Action Society, ENCA,
Yep.
and IOL that add even more layers to this whole story.
Yeah, they definitely do. It's a really complex case, for sure.
It is.
And these sources you found, they touch on so many different aspects of it, from the personal tragedy side to the larger, societal issues that are at play here.
Right. And that's what we're going to try to do today.
Yeah.
We're going to dive into these pieces that you gave us
Okay.
and see if we can sort of figure out what led to this tragic event and also, like you said, what it reveals about the bigger picture.
Exactly. We need to go beyond just what we see in the headlines
Yeah.
and look for the deeper insights.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so let's just try to piece together the basic timeline as best we can.
Okay.
From what I'm getting, Sibusiso Lawrence is accused of killing his ex-girlfriend in Umzinto, South Africa.
Right.
And then he allegedly posted a video on Facebook confessing to the crime and even including a graphic photo of the victim.
Right.
And then, sadly, not long after that, his body was found hanging from a tree.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And what's even more shocking is that the IOL article that you brought reveals that the victim was actually Lawrence's wife by traditional custom.
Oh, wow.
They had gone through lobola,
Right.
which is the traditional practice of paying a bride price,
Nice.
making their union recognized as a marriage.
So this wasn't just a dating relationship gone wrong. There's a deeper
Yeah.
cultural and familial connection here.
Yes.
That definitely adds another layer to this whole situation.
It does.
Huh.
And the sources that you've brought also give us a glimpse into the immense pain and grief that this tragedy has caused. Yes.
Action Society, which is a human rights advocacy group in South Africa, released a really powerful statement, and they said,
Okay.
"It is unacceptable and heartbreaking that she had to endure such a brutal death, followed by the indignity of having such content shared online."
Yeah, that statement really stuck with me too.
Yeah.
And in an interview with ENCA, the victim's father spoke about the devastation
Oh, wow.
that his family is facing.
Yeah.
And you can just hear the raw emotion in his words.
Absolutely. I mean, this case is a stark reminder that behind the headlines, there are real people,
Yeah,
real families grappling with unimaginable loss.
it is. And tragically, this case is just one example of a much larger problem in South Africa, and really globally.
Yeah.
Action Society highlighted the shocking statistics.
Yeah.
Between July and September 2024, a total of 957 women were murdered in South Africa.
Yeah.
That's an average of 11 women every day.
It's a truly alarming figure.
It is.
And, this case really brings the issue of gender-based violence, or GBV as it's known, into sharp focus.
It's a widespread epidemic, not just in South Africa, but around the world.
And Action Society makes a really powerful point about this being a societal problem. They said, quote, "The levels of violence in our country are alarming. We cannot allow this violence to become normalized in our society."
It makes you think.
It does. It makes you wonder, what factors contribute to this level of violence? What are we talking about here? What are the root causes?
Well, you've hit on a really crucial question.
Yeah.
GBV often stems from these deeply ingrained societal attitudes,
Uh-huh.
power imbalances, a lack of respect for women.
Right.
When violence against women is normalized or excused, it creates this climate of fear and impunity.
Yeah.
And that makes it so much harder to address the problem and protect victims.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, if these societal norms are so entrenched, where do we even begin to break this cycle?
It's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah.
But I think the key is to address those root causes that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Challenging those harmful gender stereotypes, promoting respectful relationships, and providing comprehensive support services for victims are all crucial steps.
Okay.
And educating young people about healthy relationships,
Hmm.
consent, and conflict resolution is absolutely vital.
Those are good points.
Yeah.
Education and early interventions seem absolutely key.
Mm-hmm.
But what about in cases like this one?
Yeah.
What could have been done?
Yeah.
What support was available to someone like Lawrence or his wife?
That's a really tough question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are rarely easy answers, but the sources that you've brought do provide some interesting clues,
Okay.
particularly in Lawrence's actions.
Yes. Going back to that confession video,
Yeah.
it's disturbing on so many levels.
Right.
And while I don't want to delve into the specifics of that content,
Sure.
I think we need to ask ourselves what might have motivated him to do something so horrific.
Right.
And his father's interview offers some potential insight there.
It does. His father mentioned that Lawrence had confided in his family about problems he was having in the relationship. He said, quote, "He opened up to us about what had been happening. He was a quiet person who kept a lot of things to himself."
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It seems like he may have been struggling and felt incredibly isolated, like he had no outlet for his feelings. Do you think his decision to post that video online was a kind of cry for help?
It's certainly possible.
Thank
You know, that brings us to another issue that's becoming increasingly common, the role of social media in these kinds of situations.
Yes, his decision to share this content online raises a whole other set of complex questions. On the one hand, you could argue that it raises awareness about GBV and its devastating consequences.
You could.
But on the other hand, there's the very real risk of further traumatizing victims and their families.
Right.
Not to mention the potential for triggering copycat acts of violence.
Exactly.
Does the potential benefit of awareness outweigh the potential harm?
It's a tough one.
It's a delicate balance for sure. And this case definitely underscores the need for a deeper conversation about the ethics of sharing sensitive content online.
Absolutely.
Right.
But before we dive into that, let's consider this. If Lawrence was indeed struggling, what support systems are in place for men, particularly in societies where they're often expected to suppress their emotions and be strong?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that we need to challenge those traditional expectations of masculinity.
Yeah.
And create a space where men feel comfortable seeking help when they need it.
I agree. And, you know, it's not just about individual support either.
Oh,
We
yeah.
need systemic changes to address the underlying factors that contribute to GBV.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
But where do we start? What kind of systemic changes are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about changes at every level,
Right.
from legislation and law enforcement to education and community programs. For example, South Africa actually has these specialized courts
Okay.
dedicated to GBV cases,
Right.
which is a good step.
Right.
But, you know, the effectiveness of those courts really relies on strong law enforcement investigation and prosecution of these crimes.
Right. And it's not just about punishing the perpetrators after the fact. It's also about preventing these situations from escalating to violence in the first place.
Right.
That's where things like early intervention programs, counseling services, shelters for victims can play a crucial role.
Exactly. And, you know, one thing that really struck me about this particular case was the revelation that Lawrence and his wife had gone through that traditional lobola ceremony.
Yes.
You know, this means they were considered married in the eyes of their community, even if they hadn't had a legal marriage ceremony.
That detail from the IOL article really brought home the complexity of this situation. It wasn't just a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
There were deep cultural and familial ties involved.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, did those traditional expectations play a role in the dynamics of their relationship?
It's certainly possible. And, you know, it raises these really important questions about how traditional practices and modern relationships intersect, particularly when it comes to gender roles and expectations.
That's a fascinating point. I mean, if you think about it, the concept of lobola itself is rooted in a patriarchal system where women are seen as property to be exchanged between families. Of course, that's a simplification of a complex cultural practice.
Yeah.
But it's something to consider.
It is. It highlights the need for ongoing dialogue within communities about how to adapt traditions in a way that respects both culture and individual rights.
You're right. It's about finding that balance between honoring tradition and evolving with the times. And speaking of traditions, Lawrence's father also mentioned that his son had opened up to him and his mother about problems in the relationship.
Right.
He even revealed that Lawrence suspected that the child wasn't his.
Yeah. That detail was particularly poignant. And, whether or not his suspicions were true, the fact that he felt unable to openly address those doubts and insecurities within the relationship speaks volumes.
It does. And it makes you wonder, was there someone he could have talked to? A counselor, a therapist, a trusted friend or mentor, someone who could have helped him navigate those complex emotions in a healthy way.
That's where access to mental health resources becomes so crucial. And sadly, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding mental health,
Yeah.
particularly for men. They're often expected to be stoic and strong,
Right.
to deal with their problems internally.
It's like that pressure to conform to traditional masculinity prevents them from seeking the support they need.
Exactly.
And in some cases, that bottled up emotion can explode outwards in destructive ways.
It's true. We need to create a culture where it's okay for men to be vulnerable, to express their feelings, and to seek help when they're struggling.
For sure.
Organizations like the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, they're known as SADAG.
Okay.
They're doing incredible work to provide those resources and break down those stigmas.
Yes, organizations like SADAG are essential, especially in communities where access to mental health care is limited. But, going back to Lawrence's decision to share that graphic content online,
Right.
it makes me think about the larger impact of technology on violence.
It's a crucial point. The internet and social media have fundamentally changed the way we experience and interact with violence. In some ways that can be positive. It can help to raise awareness and mobilize support for victims.
I see that. But on the flip side, it also creates new dangers. The potential for virality, the desensitization to violence that comes from constant exposure, the risk of copycat behavior.
All very real concerns.
These are all very real concerns.
Yeah, and it's not just about graphic content either.
Right.
Cyberbullying, online harassment, the spread of misinformation can all contribute to a climate where violence is normalized and excused.
It's like the online world can amplify those harmful societal norms we were talking about earlier,
Right.
creating a feedback loop that's incredibly difficult to break.
Exactly. And, this case with Lawrence's video confession is a stark reminder that the online world and the offline world are intertwined. What happens online has real-world consequences.
It's a sobering thought. And it raises the question, what responsibility do we have as individuals, as users of these platforms, to create a safer and more ethical online environment?
That's a huge question. And honestly, there are no easy answers. But I think it starts with awareness.
Yeah.
We need to be mindful of the content we consume and share.
Uh-huh.
And we need to be willing to speak out against online harassment and abuse.
You're right. We can't just be passive bystanders. We have a responsibility to use our voices and our platforms to promote respect, empathy, and accountability online.
Exactly. And I think that brings us back to a point we touched on earlier, the importance of education. Teaching young people about digital citizenship, critical thinking skills, and the ethics of online communication is absolutely essential.
I agree. We need to equip them with the tools they need to navigate this complex digital landscape safely and responsibly. And it's not just about protecting them from harm.
No.
It's about empowering them to be positive agents of change online.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a generation of digital citizens who are not just consumers of technology, but also creators and advocates for a more just and equitable digital world.
That's a powerful thought. And it makes me wonder, what role can technology play in helping to prevent GBV and promote healthy relationships?
Yeah.
Are there innovative solutions out there that we can learn from and support?
There are, and that's actually a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive. We've talked about the problems, the systemic issues, the individual choices. Now let's explore some of the potential solutions and initiatives that are working to create a safer world.
Yeah, it feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the heartbreaking specifics of this case to the systemic issues surrounding GBV.
Right.
And even the role of technology, and how that plays into all of this.
It's a lot.
It is. But now I'm really curious to hear about these innovative solutions you mentioned. What's giving you hope in this fight?
Well, sometimes the most effective solutions are actually the simplest ones. One initiative that I think is great and that's been gaining a lot of traction in South Africa is the What About the Boys campaign.
Yeah.
And it really encourages these open and honest conversations about masculinity.
I see.
Challenging those harmful stereotypes that we've been talking about.
Right.
That can lead to violence.
It's about shifting those deeply ingrained cultural norms.
Exactly.
Helping boys and men understand that expressing their emotions and seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but actually a sign of strength.
Right. It's about changing the whole definition of what it means to be a man.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. And are there other programs out there doing similar work?
There are, yeah. There are programs like the Men as Partners Network,
Okay.
which works directly with men to promote those healthy relationships and prevent violence.
I see.
They do these workshops and support groups and community outreach initiatives that encourage men to be active participants in creating this culture of respect and equality.
I love that. It's not about pointing fingers or placing blame, but about working collaboratively to address the root causes of the violence.
Yeah.
It's about men stepping up and saying, we have a responsibility to be part of the solution.
I love that. And it's not just about men either.
Right.
There are these incredible organizations that are led by women for women
Okay.
that are making a huge difference. Take the Soul City Institute for Social Justice, for example.
Okay.
They use this multi-pronged approach combining these mass media campaigns, educational programs, and community mobilization to really challenge gender inequality and empower women.
Their work sounds so impactful, reaching people through media, through education, and on-the-ground action. That's a powerful combination.
It is.
And it reminds me of the need for accessible resources for victims of GBV.
Yeah.
What kind of support is available for someone who's experiencing abuse?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, there are many organizations in South Africa and globally that are dedicated to providing that support. Places like the Sarji Bartman Center for Women and Children offer safe shelter counseling, legal aid skills development programs for survivors of abuse.
Wow.
And then there's the National GBV Command Center, which provides a 24-hour hotline for victims to access help and report incidents.
That's so crucial. Knowing that there's a lifeline, a place to turn in a moment of crisis can literally be life-saving.
Yeah.
But, all of these organizations rely on funding and support to continue their work. What can our listeners do to get involved and make a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there are so many ways to contribute. Donating to these organizations like the ones that we've mentioned is a great start. You can also volunteer your time or skills, participate in awareness campaigns, and educate yourself and others about GBV. Even just having these open and honest conversations with your friends and family about these issues can really help to break down those stigmas and create that culture of support.
That's so true. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a larger movement for change.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a safer world. This case, as difficult as it is to confront, has really shed light on the complexity of GBV.
It has.
It's not just a personal issue, it's a societal issue.
It is.
And it's going to take all of us working together to create lasting change.
I completely agree. This deep dive has been a heavy one, but I think it's a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there is always hope. There are people working tirelessly to address these issues.
Yeah.
And there are concrete steps that we can all take to be part of the solution.
Well said. And for our listeners, if this conversation has brought up any difficult emotions or you're looking for resources or support, we'll be sharing a list of organizations and helplines on our website. Please remember, you're not alone.
And to leave you with a final thought, remember that change starts with each of us. Challenge those harmful stereotypes you encounter, speak up against violence, and be an advocate for respect and equality in your own communities. Even small actions can have this ripple effect, creating a safer and more just world for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Let's all commit to being part of the solution.